Once upon a time, there was a small town surrounded by a dense forest. The townspeople relied on a train that traveled through the forest to transport goods and supplies from the nearby city. The train had been in operation for decades and had never experienced any major incidents until one fateful night. It was a dark and stormy night when the train set off on its journey through the forest. The wind howled through the trees and lightning illuminated the sky. The train chugged along the tracks, its headlights illuminating the way ahead. But then something strange happened. The train began to slow down, and the brakes screeched as if they were being forcefully applied. The passengers on board were jolted from their sleep and began to panic. As the train came to a halt, the passengers realized they were in the middle of nowhere. The forest around them was thick and there was no sign of civilization in sight. The conductor tried to radio for help, but the signal was weak and they could not get through to anyone. Suddenly, the passenger heard a strange noise coming from outside. It sounded like the branches of trees were being snapped in half. The noise grew louder and closer until it was right outside the train. The passengers looked out the windows to see what was causing the commotion. To their horror, they saw a group of creatures emerging from the forest. They were tall and lanky, with sharp claws and glowing red eyes. They began to claw at the train, trying to break their way inside. The passengers frantically tried to barricade the doors and windows, but it was no use. The creatures were too strong, and they began to break through the barriers. As the creatures stormed the train, the passengers could hear their unearthly screams and growls. They were surrounded with no escape. One by one, they were dragged out of the train and into the darkness of the forest. The next morning, rescue teams arrived at the scene, but all they found was the abandoned train with no sign of the passengers or the creatures that had attacked them. To this day, no one knows what happened on that horror train in the forest. As the train made its way deeper into the forest, the passengers began to feel uneasy. They could not shake off the feeling that they were being watched, and the hairs on the back of their necks stood on end. Suddenly, the train began to slow down. It came to a stop in the middle of the forest, and the passengers could hear strange noises outside. They looked out the windows and saw nothing but darkness. Then they heard a faint whistle blowing. The whistle grew louder and louder until it was right outside the train. The passengers could see a figure standing on the tracks, illuminated by the moonlight. It was the ghostly figure of a conductor holding a lantern. The ghostly conductor climbed on the train and began to walk through the cars, his lantern casting an eerie glow on everything it touched. The passengers tried to hide, but it was no use. The conductor seemed to know exactly where they were hiding, and he attacked them one by one. Some passengers were dragged out of their seats and into the darkness outside. Others were pulled under the train and dragged along the tracks. The screams of the passengers echoed through the forest as the ghostly conductor continued his attack. Finally, the train started up again and began to move. The passengers were shaken and traumatized by the experience, but they were alive. They had survived the attack of the ghostly conductor. From that day on, the train became known as the horror train among the people who lived near the forest. No one ever rode on it again, and it remained abandoned in the forest for years. But some say that on dark moonlights, the ghostly conductor climbed onto the train and began to walk through the cars, his lantern casting an eerie glow on everything it touched. The passengers tried to hide, but it was no use. The conductor seemed to know exactly where they were hiding, and he attacked them one by one. Some passengers were dragged out of their seats and into the darkness outside. Others were pulled under the train and dragged along the tracks. The screams of the passengers echoed through the forest as the ghostly conductor continued his attack. Finally, the train started up again and began to move. The passengers were shaken and traumatized by the experience, but they were alive. They had survived the attack of the ghostly conductor. From that day on, the train became known as the horror train among the people who lived near the forest. No one ever rode on it again, and it remained abandoned in the forest for years. But some say that on dark moonlight nights, you can still hear the whistle blowing and the screams of the passengers as the ghostly conductor continues his attack on the horror train. The old railway station had been abandoned for years, left to rot in the middle of nowhere. But locals whispered that strange things happened there, and that the station was haunted by the spirits of those who had met their end on the tracks. One dark and stormy night, a group of teenagers decided to investigate the rumors. They hopped the fence surrounding the station and crept inside, flashlight in hand. The station was musty and silent, the air thick with the scent of damp wood and rusted metal. The group split up to search the different rooms, hoping to find something spooky. As they explored, strange noises began to echo through the empty halls. Footsteps cracked on the wooden floors, doors slammed shut on their own, and the wind howled through broken windows. Suddenly, one of the teens let out a blood-curdling scream. The others raced to where they heard the sound and found their friend staring at a set of railroad tracks that led out of the station. But there was no train inside. Instead, a ghostly apparition stood on the tracks, its body translucent and its eyes glowing with an otherworldly light. The tents froze in terror as the ghostly figure started to move towards them. It floated through the air, its feet never touching the ground, and let out an eerie wail that chilled them to the bone. The group turned to flee, but the ghostly figure was too quick. It seemed to surround them, cutting off their scalp, and the air grew thick with the palpable sense of danger. Just when they thought they were done for, the ghostly figure vanished into thin air, leaving the tents trembling and gasping for breath. They fled the station as fast as they could, never looking back, and although they told their tale to anyone who would listen, most dismissed it as just another ghost story. But those who knew the truth stayed far away from the old railway station, afraid of what they might find